Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my second quarterfinals overview and analysis series. Here we just went over JDG versus Rogue yesterday. Obviously, go check out that video if you haven't. Today, we're going to be going over the quarterfinals matchup between T1 and Royal Never Give Up. An incredibly exciting one, obviously, for a lot of different reasons. Not only are these two of the most historic organizations in the history of League of Legends esports, but it is also a rematch of the MSI Finals from earlier in the year. So we're going to be seeing in this one if it is going to be a repeat of that with RNG being able to take it, or if T1 is going to have their revenge. Reminder, if you want to know my preview and prediction for this series, you can go ahead and check out my quarterfinals overview and prediction video that went up a couple days ago. That's going to be up in the iCard right now. Go ahead and check that out if you are at all interested in how I felt about these teams going into the game. I'm not going to recap it too much in this one, just so I don't keep it too long, but let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought was going to happen in this series. Did you have T1? Did you have RNG? And did the series live up to your expectations going into it? You know I love to hear you guys' feedback down in the comment section below, but let's not waste too much time. Let's go ahead and get right into the analysis. Of course, if you are new here, what I do is I go over every single game, game by game, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that both teams were able to create and where I think they should pivot in upcoming games. So, of course, that means we're going to be starting with game number 1. And game number 1 was a T1 win. T1 was able to pick up a crucial win here in game number 1. Now, as a lot of you know, I had T1 favored going into the series, so for them to be able to pick up an early win here in game number 1, not really all that surprising from me, but two really interesting drafts, in my opinion. T1, I think, has a much better one. I'll talk about that a bit as we go through it, but let's just talk about why I think T1's draft is good before we talk about why RNG's comp is bad. T1's comp is good because I think it really gives them a ton of options. You actually have a really aggressive bot side that doesn't really need a ton of resources, which I think is super positive overall for T1. Ashheimer, we saw DRX pull it out multiple times in the group stage, especially during week 2. Has the same kind of positives that it had then. Incredibly difficult lane to play into on the side of a passive lane like Aphelios and whatever he's ending up with, including the Nautilus. And so not a lot of chances for you to be able to punish the Ashheimer, and they're just going to be utility central towards the back half of the game. Heimer has relatively consistent CC, so long as he's a relatively decent player. Even if you're not, I mean, just having the ultimate on your grenade bounce can improve the quality of your CC drastically, but Ashe is also going to be incredibly useful towards the back half of the game, especially with her getting farm. We saw her as a support for a considerable amount of the season, and I think getting her back into this AD carry position really unlocks the best of her. Not only does she still have a lot of the best things that she had when she was a support, in the fact that her slows, her hawk shot are great, and then obviously the ultimate, both early game and late game, can be huge playmaking tools for the team, but now she can actually contribute a ton of damage to the team fight. Really, her only weakness is that she's fairly immobile, but that can be made up by a lot of the other members of this team overall. So I really like the Ashheimer in the bot side here, and you early pick the Graves. Now, Graves on B1, relatively risky with a lot of the things that are up, but, and I tweeted about this at the time, T1 has clearly been scouting RNG. This was one of my biggest problems with this RNG team going into groups and knockout stage as well, Worlds just in general, is the fact that they really do feel incredibly predictable in draft. There are a ton of power picks that are left up on the side of T1 because they just know that RNG don't play them. Things like the Azir, things like the Maokai, things like the Lucian are not going to be picked up on the side of RNG because that team has just not played that style all year long. They very much are one-dimensional as a team. And yes, that dimension can be incredibly strong, but that was the big reason why I was really surprised to see a lot of analysts that I really respect say that RNG was a top 2, 3 team at Worlds this year. I just never saw it that way, especially going into the event, because it just feels like their playstyle is so predictable and so easily cracked, especially in a best of 5. T1 clearly came in and did their homework. Graves on B1 really shuts down a lot of what they want to do. Owner gets a ton of prio in this game, and he uses it super duper well. You grab the Victor for Faker. That's going to be really, really good at just being able to stem a lot of the bleeding in the mid lane. Not that there was a lot of bleeding in this game, but Xiaohu on the Akali, something that could eventually turn into a problem. Faker on Victor is going to make that much less of an issue just in general. And then Zeus on the Camille. Now, this was a blind top lane pick. He goes for the Camille because it's one of his better aggressive picks, and he really is challenging Breathe to pick something that can beat him. They ban out the Fiora in first rotation, so Breed's Fiora is gone. Breed's Jax is also gone, and they're basically saying, we know you play Fiora and Jax, but what else could you play into our Camille? Because you really haven't been all that great on the tanks over the course of the year. Certainly not bad, but not to the level of playing the best top laner in the world on one of his best picks. So he goes for the Renekton in order to hopefully get some sort of early push. Now, that's just simply not going to work. Again, another one of RNG's weaknesses being exploited. Breathe is a very good player on Fiora and on Jax, but you take him off of that, and I do think he falls down significantly in the totem pole, and Zeus had a phenomenal game here. Owner did a really good job of being able to generate a lot of pressure in the early game on the Graves, which is really surprising to say. And while Wei did a good job of trying to match a lot of that, he was getting a lot of gold for himself. Owner was getting gold and transitioning it into the top lane. I want to say both Rift Heralds were used on top side to make sure that Zeus was in a great spot here, and the Camille really paid it forward. Those engages towards the back half of the game made it very difficult for anybody on the side of RNG to survive and engage. If he ulted Gala, he was dead, basically instantly. But more importantly, if he ulted Xiaohu, there was no escape for the Akali, which we saw really come into play multiple times throughout the endgame. Overall, Zeus was given a lot of resources and really paid it out for T1 in this game. He's going to get my player of the game on the Camille. If he plays like this the whole series, it's really not going to be all that difficult. Obviously, T1 kind of found their formula, getting rid of Lissandra, Fiora, Jax. That's RNG all the way, and then the Galio Talia, like they're basically forcing Xiaohu onto something where he has to take resources and then saying Breathe can't beat us on any of these other aggressive tops. And you know what? They were right. Even Wenwei played pretty well on one of his two champions, quite frankly, that he's played throughout Worlds so far, in Vi and Viego. It didn't really matter because all the resources were going to Wei, and they were trading it for a lot of resources, both on Owner and on Zeus. And that's not to take away from what everybody else did. I thought Guma was basically lights out with his ultimates in this game, coming from the Ashe. I don't think he missed a single time. It was really, really important for him to be able to keep hitting those arrows onto Gala because it consistently was able to burn his cleanse. And it means that he did not have those available for any of the crucial team fights, which was really the difference because he couldn't cleanse Camille at that point, which was always going to be an issue. And so generally speaking, Guma was really good, Keria played the lane fine, and Faker was good this game as well. Really not a lot of negatives on the side of T1. In fact, I really want to praise their mid game here. I know a lot of people are going to do it a lot better than I can in this kind of review here, but man, you want to talk about like the Korean level of choking out your opponent? This is it. Like if you ever wanted an example of why it is so difficult to play into like a top Korean team's macro, like this is the example. This was a perfect macro game. They essentially were incredibly quick for the first 15 minutes of the game, being able to generate leads, playing really aggressive, even giving a lot of gold over to Wei to generate that on their top and jungle, and then they hit that 20-minute mark, they're up 4k gold, and they slow it down, they slow the pace, and they really just start to strangle the life out of RNG by the time we hit 27, 28 minutes into this game. I mean, that 4k gold lead has transitioned to a 7k gold lead, and T1 is now getting every single objective in the game, and that's just how you win efficiently. That is the safest way to win if you can execute it right. Not a lot of teams in the world can execute that correctly. T1 is one of the very few who can at a high level, but for RNG, on the side of them, definitely a frustrating game number one. They definitely went in with a lot of I think their plans kind of foiled in draft. Lissandra, Fiora, Jax, and then every other supportive mid laner thrown out the window, which means, okay, now we kind of have to at least kind of play through Xiaohu. Because Xiaohu, when he's not on these, supportive-oriented picks, he's really not all that useful as a secondary carry. He needs to kind of be that primary guy. So Wei, kind of understanding that, really wants to play towards that mid lane, but Owner does a really good job of forcing pressure into the top lane where he knows that he has an advantage. Yes, Breathe on the Renekton theoretically should be able to do a lot with the Camille in the early game, but Zeus is just simply the better player on his champion and the better player in general. And so he knows when they take that 2v2 that if they can get Zeus that gold, they're going to come out on top. Wei basically has to respect that, considering how the early game goes, and that really just expedites T1's lead incredibly heavily. So Breathe on that Renekton really became a problem. He's going to be my dud of the game here. If you can't play Renekton at this level, and by this level, I mean against the best top laner in the world, then I need you to pick Ornn. Like, that really is how it needs to be here. I get it, the Fiora and the Jax are gone, and those are your two comfort picks. You're going to want to get them basically in every single game that you can. But Breathe isn't someone that just can't play tanks. Like, Maokai was left up, Sedge was left up, and Ornn was left up. I really think a lot of those would have been more stable, would have really decreased the likelihood of Zeus being able to take over this game in the early part, and really, I think, extended your window just a tad bit more, but Xiaohu really was no use. Once the Camille got fed, he tried to make some plays in the mid to late game, but honestly, by that point, it was really over. And then Gala and Ming, let's talk about the Nautilus pick really quick. A lot of people are really mad about the Nautilus pick, and I totally understand that. I think generally speaking, Nautilus is just abysmal as a counter to Heimerdinger because you're just gonna queue the turret. Like, there's really not much else you can do, and in team fights, you're really not gonna be able to build up enough of a lead to be this big frontline tank that I think this comp really requires you to be, and so generally speaking, I think maybe other versions of Engage would have been better in this one, even something like a Leona, something like a Mumu, maybe not a Mumu, Mumu is probably just as bad, but like something like a Leona I think could have been more helpful, and then obviously, something like a Lulu was left up, and I know that's not Ming's style, I know he's an Engage player, and he probably is the best Nautilus in the world. That's why I want to give it a little bit of leeway here, because I do understand it. It just isn't good in this specific matchup, and it really did become a problem. Gala had no chance in this game, but overall, really, really solid win for T1. On the side of RNG, what I want to see flipped up is I want to see you prioritize the things that you know you can play. Like I said, this team very much is kind of a one-dimensional, one-trick pony. I talked about that in the preview. I've been talking about that all year in the LPL. You need to get that one trick. If Lissandra, Fiora, and Jax are gone, that's fine. You need to early pick that Talia. You need to make sure that you get that, and you need to make sure you can get Gala on Aphelios, on Jinx, on something like that that can carry the late game. Way on the Viego was certainly not a problem, but if you can get him on Vi, that's something that's going to be a little bit more proactive early. Ideally, get Breathe on something he can play aggressive in the top lane, but if not, I know he can play the tanks. And then, you know, maybe take out the Heimerdinger. That was a little bit of an issue this game, but overall, RNG just needs to kind of get back onto their track. When they play other people's games, they lose. That's what happened against EDG in the playoffs, and that's what happened against T1 here in game number 1. But for T1, just stick to the game plan. Play your style. You really choked them out with macro this game. Just be able to repeat that. You had a really, really smart comp going into this. You clearly had a plan. Just stick to it. You clearly know what you're doing, and you clearly have done a lot of prep work. Continue to stifle out RNG's comfort picks, and you're probably just going to be the better team. But with that being said, game 2, obviously incredibly important in my opinion, the most important game in the series. And so, who is going to be able to take game 2? Is T1 going to go up 2-0, or is RNG going to split the series at 1-1? Well, the winner of game number 2 was T1. They are able to take game number 2 here and put themselves up in the series 2-0. A huge advantage. Very rarely are you going to be able to beat a team like T1 3 games in a row, especially on this stage. So for RNG to go down 0-2 is not exactly where you want to be here, but what a game. I mean, truly, this was a masterclass. Super duper fun to watch. Huge deficit for T1 in this one that they're able to come back and win. Very crazy that this even happened in the first place, but you gotta give it to T1 for staying in their own lane, knowing their win conditions, and playing towards it. Really playing the second half of this game masterfully. I mean, these team fights were beautiful, especially coming from the bot lane, but let's talk about the drafts just a bit first. RNG goes back to basics here. On blue side, they're actually given a big advantage. Obviously, we've talked about it on this channel. Blue side is massive for draft. There are just so many more options that you have on blue side to be able to generate a comp that's going to be useful for you than you do on red side. And so, generally speaking, they're probably going to be able to get a lot of the things that they want. Because T1's forced to ban out things like Yuumi and Aatrox instead of the Fiora and the Jax that they really wanted to take away in the early games. RNG responds to that. They take Sejuani on B1, really setting up for their solo laners to be huge carries in this game. And then B2, B3, Fiora, Sylas. Okay, we get it now. Sylas is going to be trying to generate that lead in the mid game, be able to push the wave and move around with Sejuani, try to make some of these plays, and then Fiora is the win con. Her taking over the game is going to be crucial, and they're going to spend a lot of attention topside. We know that. On the side of T1, they answer with Jace. And I get it. Zeus is Jace. Like, I get it. It's Zeus is Jace, right? Like, I'm not blind to the idea that it's his best champion. He wants to pull it out in a matchup where he knows he's going to be getting a lot of attention, but come on, like, maybe pick, like, a weak side champion, because you're gonna be getting ganked over and over and over again. You can look at this comp, just the first 3 picks, Fiora, Sedge, Sylas. You know that they're gonna be on Fiora all game long, because it's Sejuani in the jungle, and it's Sylas in the mid lane. This entire comp is built around Fiora being able to win, so you know they're gonna be up there all game long. Jace didn't feel like the pick, certainly wasn't the pick in-game, but we'll get to that later. You go for the Akali, you go for the Viego, against some picks that RNG pulled out. I think execution-wise, this is going to be fine. If the Akali can be more useful in the late game than Sylas, then she's simply going to be more useful, as we saw. And then Viego has a much higher potential to be able to take over the early game than someone like Sejuani, especially if you pilot her well. And then bot lanes, very interesting for both of them. Gal and Ming go for the Kai'Sa Nautilus. It's their 2 best champions. I get going to it in this scenario. Guma goes to the Xayah, while Keria goes to the Renata. This is an incredibly interesting duo. I understand Guma going to the Xayah. It's one of his most successful picks in pro history. Not certainly something that I would, like, associate with him. Not because he's a bad player on it, but just not something that I would ever think, like, yeah, that's Guma's pick, right? Like, but Keria on the Renata has been super successful all year long. I would argue it's his most influential pick, at least throughout the year. And so to see them come out here, definitely interesting. I think Guma understands that he's going to need to be a little bit proactive in the back half of this game and be peeling for himself. He's got Jace as his top laner, and then Viego as his jungler. Not a ton of peel coming out from this team, and so he's probably going to have to do it a bit himself. So he goes for the Xayah, who has a good amount of copious self-peel, and man, does that pay off. RNG's able to generate a pretty big lead off of some really smart plays coming out from Wei. Wei actually has a really good game on the Sejuani. He's able to create a ton, most specifically in that top lane. This top lane matchup was disgusting, completely doomed. Zeus was like 0-7 at 20 minutes. Like, this felt over. It felt completely over. Breathe was so far ahead. Wei had generated so much gold on him. Gallo was on his best champion in the late game. This felt like there was no coming back. And then you would find this 3v3 that T1 would win, and then they win a weird 5v5 around Baron, but it's like a 3-for-5, so it's not like a dominant win. They win it, but it's, you know, it's certainly not enough to take back the lead, and then they ace them, and it's like, oh my god, never mind. Like, holy shit. Like, T1 has actually climbed their way back into this, and you gotta give, in my opinion, most of the credit to this bot lane. It is actually absurd how well Guma and Keria played this game out. Now, I could do a full film breakdown of this, but unfortunately, with the way that, Worlds works, I don't have the time to do that. Maybe that's an off-season thing, but the positioning that Guma and Keria have in the second half of these team fights is simply perfect. And the mental fortitude that Guma Yushi has to save everything until he absolutely knows that he needs it is absurd. He's got Flash, he's got Heal, and he's got Ultimate. All tools that he needs to use at the right time, or else he is going to be completely blown up by this Sejuani Ultimate, by Sylas going in, by Nautilus, by somebody trying to engage on him. But he knows the limits of this champion so well. He positions perfectly. He's able to get out a ridiculous amount of damage. He knows exactly when to ult to both create offensive pressure while also keeping himself safe and not wasting that moment of invulnerability he has. I mean, this was a masterclass on the side of Guma Yushi. Clear player of the game. This is one of the best AD carry performances I have seen all year long in terms of positioning and late game team fighting. This is the Guma I wanted to see. I've been hyping Guma up all summer long because, yeah, people, I guess, just forgot how godlike this guy was in spring. His summer wasn't the same level. He wasn't a godlike ADC in summer, but he was a top 4 or 5 ADC in the LCK. Certainly a good accomplishment in this split where it felt like every LCK ADC was performing at least okay. I mean, look at the LCK ADCs that didn't make Worlds. Prince, freaking Teddy. I mean, like, there were so many that were playing super well over the course of the year, and Guma was just kind of in that pack, right? He gets to Worlds, he has a phenomenal group stage that I think kind of went under the radar, and man, does he perform in this game. If he plays like this the rest of the tournament, T1 are genuine tournament favorites. They are unbeatable if Guma can just play like this and force the other team to lose, right? Like, he won these fights. Now, I don't want to take credit away from Keria on this Renato, who he played phenomenal. I mean, this is the Keria we have been looking for throughout the year. Obviously, Renato a huge pick for T1 throughout the regular season, but here, I mean, those ultimates in the back half of the team fight, it actually crippled RNG. Not because they were getting hit by it, sometimes they would, but not just because of that, but the dispersion that creates and the amount of pressure that can create with an Akali or with a Jace Q. Like, you have so many opportunities to now engage on these fights and make it very difficult for RNG to actually play a traditional front-to-back 5v5 team fight, which, might I remind you, is a bit of what they wanted to do towards the back half of the game. Breathe on the Fiora, he probably doesn't want to be in those team fights. He wants to be trying to split the map. He wants to pull somebody. He wants to be taking towers. Xiaohu can really successfully do that as well, but you've also got the Kai'Sa, who's really good in team fights, and you're up super far in gold. You want to go for these, but at the end of the day, T1's just better. Like, that's what we learned here. T1 has the better players, they have the better execution, so it doesn't really matter how much gold you're up. Shout out to Zeus. I want to give a big shout out to Zeus because the dude was 0-7 at like 20 minutes into the game, and he was smiling, he was laughing. That is untiltable. If I had the mental, I would become a great president of the United States. It is absurd how untiltable and how uncrackable Zeus was even when he was losing. So much so that you look at some of the damage charts on the final fights of the game, he was doing the second most damage in the game in a lot of these final fights. Because that's just what he does. He understood that he was going to lose early, and it got compounded and compounded and compounded. But you know what? He still showed up late. He did his job, and he helped this team win. So, you know what? At this point, T1's got every bit of momentum on their side. This has to feel like a pretty strong win. On the side of RNG, disaster. I mean, complete and utter disaster. You were up by 6k gold in this game, and you're not able to close it out on blue side. I mean, this is about as bad as it can go, and there's a lot of blame to give, but for me, done of the game has to be Xiaohu. What an awful game from Xiaohu. This is someone who I've hyped up very consistently over the course of the year. In my opinion, he's the best player on this RNG team. He did not show up in this game. This was bad. The Sylas did literally nothing, not only in lane, but out of lane as well. Even when RNG was up in gold, he was down in gold to Faker the entirety of this game. And the creme de la creme was him dying trying to steal away a blue buff towards the back half of the game that sets up this 5v4 in base. That ends up losing the game for RNG. I'm not saying it would have been easy for them to come back at that point, but him getting caught there, quite frankly, loses them the game. They can no longer win the game from that point that he gets caught. And so Xiaohu, very easy choice for player of the game. He has to step up and be better than this if this team wants a shot at being able to come back. They have to win 3 games in a row against T1. That is by no means an easy task to have. Even with Wei and Breathe playing really well in this game, they weren't really able to translate any of that into a late game lead. A lot of the shot calling in the mid to late game was really bad from RNG, and that's just not something you want to see. Gala on the Kai'Sa had absolutely zero impact on this game, and I've talked about that in the past, that Kai'Sa, I think, as a pick is just generally super overrated in the meta right now, because for her to really pop off, you just have to win early, and Kai'Sa doesn't win early by herself. She needs assistance on that, and so, you know, if she's not up in gold, if she's not actively able to go in and blow people up immediately, she doesn't really have the same kind of impact that some of these other really strong backline AD carries have, and so generally speaking, I just want to see different out of RNG. It's crazy to say, because this feels like a comp that they should be able to win on, but it just isn't, and I really don't know where you go from here, because your one trick isn't even working against T1, even though you were up 6k gold. You just need to stay calm, I guess, and try to run it back. Try to be a little bit more clinical towards the back half of the game, not leave these opportunities open, not die randomly like Xiaohu did multiple times throughout this game, and maybe you can translate that 6k gold lead into a win. But for T1, you have every single ounce of momentum in this series right now. You just need to carry that across the finish line. So are they going to be able to do that in game number 3, or is RNG going to at least prevent themselves from getting swept in the quarterfinals here? Well, the winner of game number 3 was T1. They are able to take game number 3, and they're able to make our second series the same as our first, a clean sweep. And how sweep it is for T1 as Faker continues his streak. He has now made 7 world championships and has made at least the semifinals in all 7. It is actually absurd. It's a statistic. I just do not believe it's real. It's like when they showed that every Worlds he's been at, he's gotten out first in the groups. For him to have always won in the quarterfinals when he's gotten to Worlds is legitimately unreal, and that continues here with a very easy sweep for T1, where game 2 was really close. RNG had a lead for a majority of the game and then kind of threw it late. T1 had a stranglehold of this one, even more so than game number 1. T1 is able to completely just outplay and outclass RNG. It looked like they were completely mental boomed. After the previous game, this one was feisty at the beginning. A lot of fights, a lot of action going on early, but pretty much all of it going in the favor of T1. You got to give credit to everybody on the side of T1 in this one. Zeus, after having been completely embarrassed on the Jace, after being kind of run over in that laning phase, picks the Yone into Aatrox. Now, this could be a good matchup, like, generally speaking. I think Yone does well into Aatrox, but generally, leaving Aatrox up against the top laner that just bodied you on something else, really, really bold, but you take away the Fiora instead, and I actually somehow kind of like that decision. Breathe has looked like a completely different beast on that Fiora pick in general, leaving up the Aatrox for him to grab instead. Turned out to be good for RNG, as Zeus clearly showed that he had practiced playing into Aatrox a bit, the Yone pick really working out. They go for the double melee with the Sejuani, this time on T1's side, I should say. Owner plays the Sej super well. I mean, Wei had a really good game on Sej, but Owner still showing why that champion is incredibly strong. I get a ton of comments pretty regularly, not only here, but on Twitter as well, about how Sej is just not all that good of a pick and that she's overprioed, and this is the reason she's good, because when she works, like, she wins you the game by herself. In game 2, Wei played great on the Sej, really set his team up to win, and it just wasn't able to be done in the end, but in this one, T1 really shows the power of that Sejuani. When you can get that combo rolling, it is basically unbeatable. Owner was dominant on this map in terms of pressure, in terms of combat. He was getting every objective. I mean, it was just dominance on the side of Owner. A great game of Sej from him. Zeus was able to get a ton of gold in that top lane on the Yone, and he was really able to snowball out of control. Faker made some chef's kiss level plays on this Akali. When you give Faker like an inch to be able to carry the game, he's going to take a mile, and that's what happened here. But somehow, someway, in a comp with Yone, Sej, and Akali, it's the Varus and the Tom that stand out once again, baby. Guma and Keria were so good in this series, and I gotta say it, for all the people out there that don't want to hear it, I'm sorry, but you gotta hear this. Guma gapped Gala in this series. Like, it was not even close. It was really genuinely not close at all. Now, there were bigger problems than Gala, truly, but Gala had, like, no impact. I was barely talking about him. He was actually played his best game, in my opinion, in this game 3 on the Aphelios, where he was able to generate a bit of gold on the off chance that Yone was coming down bot or they were roaming up and he was overextending, which did happen a couple times, but Gala, just generally speaking, didn't do anything. It's not that he played bad, he didn't miss position, he didn't make major mistakes, but he also wasn't, like, driving his team to victory. It was definitely a little disappointing in that regard. I would have liked to see them invest a bit more into him just generally in this series. They put a lot into Breathe and into Xiaohu, but really not a lot into Gala. So for someone who played super well in the group stage, this feels like a very unfitting way to go out, but holy crap, were Guma and Keria super good in this game. I'll get to Keria in a minute because he's my player of the game on the Tom. Spoiler alert, as you can already see on the screen, but Guma, like, what had happened? The positioning god, actual positioning god. Not only was he making roams on this Varus, being able to flash aggressively, not feeling like he needs to save it, but multiple times in this fight where he's got tier 1 boots and he's dodging the hell out of Sylas, he's dodging Aatrox. Like, I can't even begin to tell you how well Guma is playing right now. I mean, he's playing literally perfect. There were, I guess, some mistakes in this game, but I couldn't see him. Pretty much every single time he was in any bad position, it was mostly because Keria just was on cooldown, but he knew he could play super aggressive because of the Tom Devour, which is always going to be good with Varus, but even his ability to just sidestep and position, Guma is on a different level right now. Like I said, if he continues to play like that, this team is a world favorite. Like, he's playing like one of the best AD carries in the world right now, if not the best AD carry in the world. If he keeps that up, it is untouchable. I mean, T1's got way too much talent. If they have the #1 top laner and the #1 bot laner, I mean, untouchable. Maybe the #1 support, and that's not even including Faker and Owner. Like, come on, like, that team is disgusting. But shout out Keria, time to give him his due. What an awesome series from him. Not only does he pull out the Renata in the previous game and really start to take over a lot of these team fights, really start to push them in favor of T1, but he pulls out the Tom in this game. What a brilliant pick on R4 to really secure them a great matchup no matter what. They've already committed to the Aatrox Vi Sylas like combination, and so picking up the Tom here really shuts down all of them. You can't assassinate the Varus. You're really never going to be able to get on the backline with that, so the Vi ultimate is essentially useless. And then investing into the top side makes the Aatrox useless. Xiaohu getting behind on the Sylas makes him useless. This game's over. This game is over in draft, in my opinion. It's not over in draft, I should say. There are avenues for RNG to win, but I mean, if Keria plays like this, it's over. Like, it's untouchable. Not only was he incredibly great on his engages, Tom obviously really known as, like, this more supportive, protective champion, but ever since the rework, I don't really see him that way. I think Tom is an engager. I mean, we can say it how it is. Tom is an engaged champion, especially towards the early part of this game. Yes, he can protect with the ultimate, but he engages. That's what Tom does, and so for him to be able to do that so effectively in this game, really making the Soraka's life difficult in the mid game, while also being incredibly good at protecting Gumayushi, making sure that anytime he's in any relevant danger that he's going to be able to eat him up, put him out in a new position, and Guma's going to be getting right back to doing all that damage. It's just it's perfect from these two in the bot lane. Guma and Keria, if they play like this, they're going to be world champions. It is that simple. It's going to be interesting to see if they can play like this every single series, because this was like a different level of execution, in my opinion, from T1's bot lane, but this was phenomenal. There was really nothing else to say. And like I said, Zeus, Owner, Faker, all played really well in the same vein. But for RNG, really tough one, man. Like, you go back to your comfort here. Wei gets on one of his 2 champions that he plays. No Viego this game, but he does go to the Vi. I get a lot of flame for saying that Vi and Viego are the only 2 champions Wei plays, but go look at his match history. Like, he clearly favors those 2 over anybody else. He had a good Sedge game, but you know what I mean? Like, it's those 2 champs. Those are Wei's champion pool. But you get Breathe on the Aatrox, and even then, like, Gala on a late game carry. Ming goes away from the engagers because they have not been working, so he goes to the Soraka, something that I think really can work in this context, but just generally speaking, they're mental boomed, and I don't want to say it, but they're just not as good as T1. They're just not. Breathe gets demolished in the top lane matchup on Aatrox. This is probably the worst performance that we've seen at Worlds. This is probably the worst Aatrox that we've seen yet. Unfortunate that's got to be on Breathe, but against Zeus, it just happens. He clearly had the counter. We've been looking all Worlds long for a counter pick to Aatrox. We've seen the Teemo, we've seen the Garen, we've seen plenty of things tried into that spot. Turns out it was just the Yone all along. Or actually, maybe turns out it was just Zeus all along that needed to be playing into it. Wei tried to make plays a ton early. Like I said, really skirmishing early game. Even in the bot lane, Gala was able to get a bit of gold. So was Xiaohu off it, but it was often at the expense of Wei, which means that he got super far behind and he wasn't able to create anything. That compounded with the fact that any target that he tried to ult could just get devoured by Tahm Kench. All of a sudden, this Vi really doesn't do anything in this game, and so Wei's gonna get my dud of the game for game number 3. He looked mega tilted in this final game. I mean, most of RNG did, but especially Wei, like, he just wasn't even, he had no facial expression throughout the entirety of this game. Xiaohu severely underperformed in the series. I'm going to say he's the dud of the series. He probably was the worst player on RNG here. And that's super disappointing because, like, come on, man. Like, you're the best player on this team. I was hyping you up all group stage, and you really had to come out and disappoint. Obviously, had a lot of his main picks taken away from him. Lissandro's banned out the entire series. We saw the Talia, the Galio, consistent bans against him, but he even on the Sylas pick, which is, like, pretty good for him, and generally is always going to be positive, he just was not able to perform, just generally speaking. Xiaohu simply had to play better if RNG wanted a chance at winning this series, and it just was not meant to be. But Gala and Ming, for Gala's credit, he played well in this third and final game on the Aphelios. Wasn't really given a lot of opportunity in this series like I talked about, but really wanted to see him make more of the opportunities he was given, and then Ming was also bad in the series. The Nautilus engages were poor. He goes to the Soraka, and while it is significantly more effective in my opinion, it just was never going to be enough to push RNG over the top. So, unfortunately, that's going to be the end of RNG's season and the end of this roster. Going from winning MSI to being knocked out in quarterfinals, I can't say I'm surprised. This is exactly what I predicted for this team. I had low expectations for them going into this tournament, much lower than all the other analysts. I saw a lot of people picking them as their crystal ball winner, and I saw people putting them, probably at worst, like top 3, top 4 teams at the tournament. I was just never, ever going to get behind that. If you go back to my predictions, I was never able to get behind that because of things like this, where it's like, yeah, this team got figured out. They had an exact style of play, and once that was taken away from them, they really had no way of dealing with it. Not to mention the fact that I think people really overestimated just the pure talent level on this team. While players like Xiaohu and Ming are great, I really just was not all that impressed with Topside, and that really paid dividends at this tournament. So just generally speaking, unfortunately for RNG, their season's going to be over. It's going to be interesting to see how they run back. Obviously, a lot of veteran faces on this team. We'll see what they end up doing. Obviously, I imagine they'll be building around Gala, but outside of that, I really have absolutely no idea. Ming, in my opinion, is still one of the best supports in the world. Xiaohu's still one of the best players in the world, but I have no idea where you go from here. It's just an unfortunate end to a season that I think had a lot of promise. But for T1, you're moving on to the semis. It is now T1 versus JD Gaming in the semifinals. You can bet your ass that I'm excited about Zeus versus 369. That is what dreams are made of, and with the spot in the finals on the line, T1 is going to be trying to take this momentum that they had, beating a pretty good RNG team in pretty dominant fashion, and try to translate that into beating their LPL rivals in JDG. All right, well, that is going to do it for my overview of the T1 RNG quarterfinals matchup here at Worlds. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to leave a like. Obviously, it really helps out the video. And if you made it this far, I assume you did like the video. Obviously, if you are new, hit that subscribe button. It really does mean a lot to the channel. Obviously, if you like the content that I put out here today, you're probably going to like a lot of the other reviews that I did. You can go check out the JDG Rogue one from yesterday. And then obviously tomorrow we've got, or today, I guess as you guys are watching this, we've got a beautiful matchup, probably the most exciting of the quarterfinal stage, between Gen G and Damwon Kia, arguably 2 of the top 3-4 teams in the world right now playing off against each other in the first round. Cannot wait for that one. If you are excited for that, let me know what you guys think of that series down in the comments section below. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.